Hi everyone, happy Wednesday. Excited to start this live chat with you today. I have a wonderful guest. My wonderful colleague Natalie is going to be joining us in a few minutes, and we are going to be talking about how to recover from a narcissist ex. So I'm going to go ahead and have Natalie join us.
Hi, Dr. Menije.
Hi Natalie.
Hi.
Thank you for joining me today. How are you?
Good. Thank you for having me. I always love talking about narcissism.
Yes, you are the perfect person to have this conversation with. You're such an expert on this topic, and I cannot wait to, hear all your wonderful suggestions and information. But before we get started with our topic, would you please do us the honor and share a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I'm Natalie Jambazian. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist. I mostly specialize in working with the survivors and victims of narcissistic abuse, but I also work with children as well. I feel like, that's where it starts. And if I can heal that part of them from the beginning, that's just a dream come true. So I work with children. I also mostly work with women in my practice in Sherman Oaks. Of course, based off of what's happening during the pandemic, I am mostly seeing clients on telehealth.
That's wonderful. And thank you for sharing a little bit about your practice with us. So one of the first things I wanted to ask you about this topic of, recovering from a narcissistic ex is having you describe to us how would we know if we are currently or have been in relationship with a partner who's a narcissist? What would be the signs that would help us identify that this is an unhealthy relationship to be in?
Mm-hmm. The first thing that I would say is that narcissism is a pattern. So there's certain red flags that you want to be aware of. And, there's so many different red flags, but the main ones, the main ones that I can describe that are characteristics of a narcissist is a sense of grandiosity. So they over exaggerate everything, whether it's materialistic things or they might, discreetly over exaggerate certain things that they have, whether, it's a great job that they have, whether they're such a great person, whether they're advocates and humanitarians. So they really show this over exaggeration of how they perceive in the world. They have a lack of self-esteem. So based off of their lack of self-esteem, they try to put other people down, right? So they'll put their partners down. They'll criticize their partners. You're not doing this right. You should do it this way. You're not dressing well. So they kind of mold their partners into becoming who they want to be.
Yeah.
There's also a lack of guilt or any remorse. They don't feel any empathy, unfortunately. They might show it, but they don't really care. And that's the hard truth.
And one of the things I wanted to ask you is when you mentioned that criticism, do you think that it may initially start by, and I know this sounds manipulative, but I'm just wondering if it starts by innocent feedback, and does it first start by small feedback and then turns into like everyday criticism, or from day one it has that tone to it?
Yeah, that's the tricky part. The narcissist has two masks. One is how they show themselves to their partners, and the other mask is how they show themselves to the exterior world. So it's actually very difficult for an empath to identify these toxic patterns from the beginning, because the narcissist will make themselves look like they're kind, they're charming, and charm looks so nice, right? Their partner idealizes them. They're so smart and intelligent. They're very articulate with their words. So it's really difficult to spot a narcissist from the beginning. But if you're really, if you really hone in on these traits and these patterns, I think you will discover by at least the second or third time of meeting the narcissist that there is a red flag there.
Yes, yes. And I think that's why this information can be really helpful for many of our listeners, because it may not be so obvious from day one. And we, as you said, we're, I guess, looking for patterns of grandiosity, maybe excessive, unhealthy criticism, judgment of the person, lack of guilt, you mentioned, lack of taking responsibility and accountability of one's behavior are a few of the things you just mentioned that I'm kind of, I guess,
and they're very
highlighting.
controlling. They're very controlling, so a lot of victims feel isolated by friends and family because of their insecurity. Deep down inside, narcissists are so insecure. That's why they criticize others, so they feel good about themselves.
And I guess maybe a question I can ask you is, when you just mentioned the isolation, I felt this confusion that I wonder other people might be experiencing, where how would you know if the isolation they're going through is led by their narcissistic partner versus the isolation that being, advised by the government? Is there a way for people to know that I'm not just isolating because we're in quarantine? I think the isolation maybe been around the pre-quarantine, or is isolation by narcissistic partner was like, well, he or she won't let me get on Instagram and watch a live chat. He or she won't let me text message or call my family. Is that how isolation maybe shows up that's different than the quarantine isolation?
Exactly. There's a big difference. The isolation started far before the quarantine. So if the victim of a narcissistic abuse, they identify that they are isolated, sometimes they're kind of in denial. If they're in the beginning of stages of identifying if they are or are not in a narcissistic relationship, it's going to be hard for them to understand they are isolating. Here's the difference. When you're in quarantine, you're still connecting with others, right? We're connecting through what's called house party with friends and family. We're connecting with Zoom. We're FaceTiming. So, but when you're in a narcissistic relationship, you'll see criticism, put your phone down. The narcissist will get your password, for example, and want to control who you talk to and who you see.
Yeah.
And so you'll realize that it's hard for you to even talk to your family and friends because the narcissist needs their attention at all times. So you have to cook for them, you have to clean for them. I mean, in a way, it's kind of like being a slave to them.
Yes, yes. And that was really helpful. One of the things I wanted to ask you today, we really wanted to talk about how to recover from such relationship. And we're definitely going to be sharing with people some coping skills. But before we get to that, would you describe how a relationship with a narcissist and a breakup from that relationship is different than a regular breakup or a bad breakup? How does this relationship actually affects the person? How do they come out of this relationship, I guess, is what I'm wondering a little bit.
Yeah, that's a really good question. The difference between a regular breakup and a breakup from a narcissistic ex is that a regular breakup, just like any breakup, there's a grieving process, right? So you're kind of in shock at first, and then you're sad, and sometimes you're angry, and then sometimes you think back, right? You kind of go through the grieving stages, like what could you have done differently? So as you go through those stages, at some point you'll realize, okay, maybe that wasn't the right one for us. Maybe we decided maybe that's just not right for us, right? And you kind of move on, right? But with a narcissistic relationship, it's actually really hard to even let go, because here's why. There's a cycle of abuse. You know how domestic violence, there's a cycle of abuse, there's honeymoon phase, right?
Yeah.
But with narcissism, it's called love bombing. So this is where the narcissist acts so amazing, right? So they'll provide like words of affirmation. They'll give you gifts. Before quarantine, they can take you on trips, or they can just take you on like mini road trips, to one country, and just lavish you with so much attention and adoration. And after the love bomb, it doesn't last. After the love bombing, there's the devaluing. This is when the narcissist really kind of gaslights their partner. You know, you're doing something wrong. You're the crazy one, right? You know, and then after the discarding, after the devaluing phase is the discarding phase. So the narcissist, this is when there's no lack of empathy. They might just withdraw. They might just not talk to their partner. If you're in a relationship and you have kids with a narcissist, they will just leave the house, not really care about, like, you know, just spending time with the family, will ignore you. So there's that cycle of abuse with narcissists.
Yeah, there are these stages that I'm seeing the narcissist kind of creates to manipulate the relationship.
So they suck their there's a hoovering stage in between love bombing and between love bombing and devaluing, and it's like the hoovering vacuum, right? They suck their victim back in. So in a regular relationship, you might just move on with your life, but this cycle continues over and over again, because, you know, sometimes victims feel alone. Sometimes victims feel like, you know, financial stressors that they can't leave their, you know, abusers. They also what's called a trauma bond. They're bonded by this trauma that they're experiencing. So if, you know, it might take years, if not like more than 5 years to recover, you see.
Wow.
So the grieving stages continue over and over again until they get to a point where maybe they've seen a therapist, or somehow, you know, have looked deep within and really did the, you know, read books. But for me, you know, in my opinion, I really do think that someone who ends up seeking help, like a therapist or a coach who specializes in narcissism, the recovery process is a little bit tolerable.
Okay. And you mentioned the financial piece of recovering from such relationship. For all the reasons you just mentioned, it sounds like while you're in that relationship, there could be, you know, limitations in your financial security, financial independence. So when you end the relationship and you're in the healing, you would have to take care of your financial situation, and it sounds like you have to rebuild that. And sounds like, you know, to obviously repair the isolation, you have to repair the social support connection. In terms of the inner work, is it fair to assume that someone who got out of a relationship with a narcissist ex, a partner, have to work on their self-esteem and their knowing their self-worth? I just assume with everything you described that this type of partner definitely it's out to, you know, create the insecurity, doubt in the victim.
Absolutely. I always I call narcissists soul suckers, you know, because after so much manipulation, consistent lying, pathological lying, consistent controlling, consistent gaslighting, you know, for many, many years, that makes the victim feel so exhausted, you know. So it's, you know, that's why I created self-love, because I do believe that you have to love yourself enough. And it's not selfish, but you have to love yourself enough so that you don't allow toxic partners in your life, right?
Yes.
So it goes beyond self-love. Recovery goes beyond self-love. You know, the first step is recognizing and identifying that, yes, my partner is a narcissist.
Okay.
Right? Is not being in denial, but accepting this is it, right? And then the other component to that is that there's this childhood wound in the victim, of the survivor, that needs to be uncovered. In my experience, in my practice, I've noticed that certain people who are empaths, they might have gone through certain trauma in their life, whether their parent was a narcissist, whether they've gone through, you know, emotional, psychological and physical abuse, right? They've chosen partners that were mirrored when they were younger. So really kind of connecting the two dots and uncovering those childhood patterns and really processing that trauma when you were younger.
And
that's the second step.
I know that I know you have more probably suggestions to share with us, but I just wanted to acknowledge how powerful what you say is, because I know sometimes people come to therapy because something just happened in their lives, or something has been happening the past few years, so in the recent years of their lives, which is really normal. And we as therapists definitely make room for that issue that brought them to therapy. But I'm understanding that you are really encouraging people to do an in-depth discovery and realize if there's any earlier life experiences that really need attention as well. And I was wondering, with the stage 1 you just mentioned, with recognizing that you were or are partnered with somebody who's a narcissist, do you think there's any shame that holds the person from accepting that reality? Like, are they embarrassed to admit, or is that actually not, like, people feel ready, like, oh my God, that's what I've been going through, I'm not crazy, my partner is a narcissist, like, or a little bit of both?
I mean, spot on. You know, there's so much shame in, you know, asking for help for victims. There's embarrassment to reveal that, you know, I am with a narcissistic partner and I'm struggling, right? So a lot of empaths, they don't want to tell anybody, especially their family, and especially if they're in a relationship for like 20 plus years with children.
Yes.
If you have children involved, I mean, that brings so much shame, because remember, we're socialized to be like, divorce is really bad.
Yeah.
So you have to stick it out no matter what happens. Right?
Yeah, it's the father or mother of my children comes to play, and as you said, makes it harder for people to ask for help, or, you know, do the stage 1, which is acknowledging the partner. What other coping skills, resources do you recommend? You mentioned self-love is an important part of this recovery process.
Yeah, definitely. You know, I go through like the childhood patterns, and then afterwards I really work on challenging their faulty perceptions of themselves. Yeah. So there's so much self-doubt in a victim or a survivor, you know, because imagine many years of abuse, psychological abuse, even if it's, let's say it's not physical. Narcissism doesn't have to be one or the other. It could be all physical, psychological, or emotional, or it could be one or the other. But it's still brutal going through that relationship. So many years of that really kind of brings a victim down with their self-worth, with their self-love, of you know, their life in general. They feel hopeless, which is a sense of depression, right?
Yeah. So are those things that that part of the therapy, I assume, is the what we call like the dual diagnosis, or, you know, the depression, the anxiety. I don't know if you see your clients experiencing social anxiety, maybe substance use.
So much anxiety.
Yeah.
So much anxiety. There is, you mentioned substance use. Yes, a lot of also narcissists use some sort of substance, because remember, at the core of the narcissism is insecurity.
Yes.
Right. So they try to numb their pain by alcohol, or some use drugs. And the partner also feels, in order for them to connect with their narcissistic partner, to maybe take on alcohol themselves. And yes, later on they realize, wait a minute, I've been drinking every day with my partner. Right? Absolutely.
So to have the connection.
Exactly. Yeah.
So possibly it obviously varies from person to person, but some people that are listening may want to consider addressing their relationship with substances during their recovery period. Is, like you just said, if you have ended up engaging in more than you would have during the relationship, then that's something you would have to also work on during the recovery phase and the healing phase.
I would ask, like, you're drinking, okay, so how many drinks and what are you drinking? Because they're not conscious enough to notice that maybe it's a problem, right?
Yes.
so a lot of the times in therapy with my clients, I really bring the unconscious to the conscious for them to see it.
Yes, that's so
And face it.
powerful. That's very powerful. And would you maybe share with us some of the ways therapy is helpful, like maybe the resources or online therapy, books you mentioned earlier?
Yes. I think the most important thing about finding a therapist is you really want to find someone who specializes in narcissism, you know,
Yes.
as unfortunately, you know, there already victims have shame, and not every therapist or not every coach understands this, and the cycle of abuse. You know, so I think it's very important to make sure you find the right person, to find the right therapist for you.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So, you know, I specialize in working with this. So if anybody needs, you know, consultation, even, you know, just to talk about certain things to see if this is a good fit for them, I provide that. And so one suggestion that I have is, this is my Bible. It's called Should I Stay or Should I Go?
Oh, I love it.
It's by Dr. Ramani Durvasula. And, you know, I always say this is my Bible because this is like a survivor's guide. You know, it's like you can read this book over and over again so that it kind of, you know, wires into your brain like, oh my gosh, this is real. You know, it's not fantasy anymore. I'm in this like awful relationship. And this is real. So this is like, it's not for the faint of heart. It's such a great book. I love this one. And then I also recommend Psychopath Free.
Oh, interesting.
This is a very good book too. And there's so many different avenues to this, but I really do think that if you find the right therapist, your healing process will be so much better. And even if you decide to stay in a relationship, you know, I'm the type of therapist, I come from a very non-judgmental perspective. I don't really tell my clients to leave. I guide them to make that decision for themselves.
Yeah. And those books are things people can read even if they're currently in the relationship with a narcissist partner, and they're useful obviously as they have ended the relationship and seeking healing with working with a professional therapist, as you said, specializes in this topic. And I absolutely agree with you. I think when there are certain unique experiences to things we go through in life, and I'm sure this journey has its own unique traits to it. So someone like you who's well versed in this is the best fit to guide the person. I want to ask you a little bit, as you said in the beginning, right now we're all doing our sessions virtually, and I know sometimes there is a little bit of hesitance to use online therapy. Some people have put therapy on hold, or other people are postponing starting therapy. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about how would online therapy can be used, especially if a person's obviously stuck in the relationship right now.
Yeah, very good question. You know, just like there's shame and guilt of how victims feel, and there's a lot of control in the household and manipulation. A lot of victims feel scared. They don't usually tell their narcissistic partners. But what I've noticed in my practice right now, working with the victims and survivors, is, you know, if there's a what is that saying? If there's a way, there's a will. Right?
Yes,
If there's a will, there's a way, right? So they somehow figure out a way to get out of the house, whether it's like in the car, or telling their partner also. I know this sounds like, you know, remember, we all lie sometimes, right?
Yes.
We lie because we fear something and we try to protect ourselves. So a lot of the times victims try to lie to their partners so that they feel freedom, right? So they can say, oh, you know, I'm working on myself. I know I'm the problem, so I'm seeking a therapist. So they will, you know, go to their car, or maybe they'll go to their grocery store, and within that 50-minute session, they can park somewhere and they can talk to their therapist. So it's kind of a win-win situation for them. You know, it's like they go out, you know, and at the same time they're taking care of themselves. So there's different ways of approaching on how to work with the therapist during this time.
I think what I love about what you said is I don't think that, yes, I think that mental health is very important and it's okay to go to therapy, but at the same time, I don't force any of my clients to tell their family and their friends they're in therapy. So
Exactly.
I think it's okay to give ourselves permission to keep these things private in general. But obviously, if you're in a relationship with a narcissist, it might be in your best interest to maybe keep it private a little bit, or it might be safer for you to keep it in private. And I love that, maybe even having to say to your partner, as I think I heard you say, oh, I'm working on myself. I know I'm the problem, and letting him or her believe that so that you can have that therapy that you need. And I love that because there's this, pressure like, oh, you must just tell everybody why you're in therapy. I'm like, no, you can keep it private.
Right, exactly. I say that to my clients too. You don't have to tell your partner or other people. That's okay. It's confidential. It's their time.
Yes, and whenever they're ready, I know that people will share what they're comfortable with. So could you tell a little bit about how people can find you, your website, and your location you mentioned was Sherman Oaks?
Yes. So of course I'm in my office because I want to keep sane a little bit and just kind of get out of the house. But I am seeing clients on telehealth. They can reach me on my Instagram, which is self-love _ society. They can DM me, or also they can reach me at shermanoakstherapy.com, and they can try to find, they can just like reach out by messaging me there and setting up a consultation.
That's so wonderful. Natalie, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you
And this
so much.
conversation was incredibly informative and helpful. I learned so much already. I know people did too. So
I'm
thank you
so
for
glad.
sharing your wisdom. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. I always love sharing.
Thank you. It was
I
a
appreciate
wonderful.
you.
Absolutely. Have a great rest of your day.
You too.
Bye, everyone.